morning. It is an honor for me to welcome you all once again to the second day of the FOSS conference. We will begin this day with the fourth session, which discusses about FOSS and communities. I would like to take the opportunity to invite Dr. Matthias, who has studied business administration and computer science at the University of Bern until 2005 and completed his doctoral in 2009. His research focused on open source communities and firm involvement. He is also a member of the board of Swiss Open System User Group, a member of the board of Open Data, secretary of the Swiss Parliamentarian Group for Digital Sustainability, and leader of the OSB Alliance Working Group Office Interoperability. In August 2013, Dr. Matthias started as postdoc to focus on topics around digital sustainability. Among other projects, he created the new lecture, Open Data, Data Management and Visualization, teaching open government data theory, as well as tutoring the programming of open data apps by the students. Ladies and gentlemen, it will be my honor to invite Dr. Matthias on stage to present his lecture on digital sustainability of open source communities.
Good morning, salam alaikum. This is the only phrase I can talk in Arabic, but I'm very happy to be here. It's a great honor to be here. And so let's start. Just for your information, the slides are already online on SlideShare/nice. And because I have a little bit too many slides, as always, so you can look at them with your time of speed. So today I would like to talk to you about digital sustainability. This is a topic which I'm working on since several years. This is the new research center I'm leading. We are looking at open source. We are researching about open source, consulting open source and teaching, but also about open data and other digital topics like net neutrality or IT procurement. And also I would like to point out my new contact number, also Oman mobile phone, so if you have any questions, please call me also when I'm back. So today the agenda is basically about, first of all, the concept. So probably you might not have heard about digital sustainability yet, so I'll introduce you quickly to this. Then there will be a very short example, a historic example, a very old one. And then we look at what actually sustainability means in open source communities. So, sustainability is a term which is actually also quite old. It comes from the 18th century when it was about cutting the wood within a context that it can grow again. So this is the original definition of sustainability. It was more clearly defined in the United Nations in the 80s, saying sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this is a very generic definition. And why is this actually important or interesting for us as being interested in open source? It helps us, I believe, in communicating a little bit better what is the benefit of open source and why actually should governments also focus on open source. Because if you want to tell somebody about open source who has never heard about programming and source code, it gets quite difficult. You basically have first to explain what is source code, what is compiling source code, what is binary files and so on. And with the concept of sustainability, in parentheses, everybody knows what sustainability means. And it's a term which is, at least what I can say from my context, it's very popular to say we have a sustainable company or a sustainable business model or sustainable strategy. And that's why actually we're looking at digital sustainability. Now, as you have heard, ecological sustainability, this is a term which is used very often in the international context on climate change and so on. But then there's also social sustainability, looking at humans, so that also humans are able to work in a certain context which is sustainable, or economic sustainability, that companies or governments have their financial area under control. And we actually claim there should be a fourth dimension to sustainability called digital sustainability, which we will look at in a moment. Now, the idea of digital sustainability is not mine. It's actually a colleague of mine in ETH Zurich, where we studied and did our doctoral thesis basically together. He says that, Marcus Stopp says that digital resources are handled sustainable if their utility for society is maximized, so that digital needs of contemporary and future generations are equally met. So it's the same definition as there is used by the United Nations, but then actually applied to the digital context. And also, what does it mean? It means that basically digital needs are optimally met if resources are accessible to the largest number and reusable with minimal restrictions. So it's not about actually closing things and making people putting them outside, but actually including them, opening up. And that's also important if you look at what is digital resources meant. It's not just source code, but it means everything from text, image, audio, software, video. So this is important, that basically this is the basic understanding, a more generic definition which could help us also to communicate the concept of open source. Now it helps if you think of the classification of goods. So goods can be classified into access and rivalry. And so there are rivalrous goods and non-rivalrous goods. So things that are consumed. If you eat an apple, no one else can eat this apple. But we have heard yesterday, if someone has an idea, another person has an idea, then you have basically two ideas. And then the access dimension, it's about excludability and non-excludability. So this is the classic economic definition of public goods. So a public good, for example, is a non-rivalrous, non-excludable good, or a club good is rivalrous, excludable, but non-rivalrous. And if you think of this in the context of source code or software, then it's quite easy to see that if you have club good, it's a proprietary software. It can be copied many times, but someone who has the licensing key can actually restrict you the access. And when you talk about open source, this is in the economic sense a public good. Everybody can use it, everybody can share it, and it's also non-rivalrous, so it's not consumed. And this actually helps us to get a clearer picture. I wrote a very short paper about the characteristics of digital sustainability. So there shouldn't be any legal obstacles to actually hinder people using and developing digital resources. There should be the tacit knowledge, the knowledge about the software or the digital resource should be distributed as much as possible. And then the economic use of resources here, actually the reuse of digital assets can be maximized if it's reused as much as possible. The risk can be reduced if there's not one central firm or one person who has all the knowledge about it, but if it's here again, if it's transparent and it's distributed. The absorptive capacity is important so that for example, let's say the documentation is well done for software source code, or other aspects are important. And also then policy conditions need to be ideal, so there shouldn't be a copyright law which actually hinders to use open source and other open access. Why are we not just talking about informational sustainability? Because in the essence, it's about knowledge, about kind of sustainable knowledge. So I think in today's digital society, we are confronted with a huge amount of data. It's growing, and personally, I don't see an end on it. So if you think on the gigantic mass of information, we basically can only handle this if it's digital. So that's why we suggest to call it digital sustainability. Now, actually, the idea of digital sustainability isn't so new as it might seem to you at the moment. There is an example. Who has heard of the Voyager Golden Record? It's a very old record sent out with the Voyager 1 and 2 spacecrafts in 1977. So this is actually the, let's say, the earliest type of digital sustainability which was made. And so it's sent out with this spacecraft to actually communicate to extraterrestrial intelligence. What are humans? Where do we live? Where do we come from? And so on. And on this golden plate record, there are actually lots of information stored. It's 116 images are stored. There's sounds, classical music, spoken languages. Some American presidents have said something on this golden record, and so on. So it's a very interesting type of storage, and it should last a lot. It's now traveling with 60,000 kilometers per hour and about 20 billion kilometers away from Earth. We expect that in about 40,000 years there will be maybe in the closeness of some stars. So in the essence, this is the original plate, and here we see a description on the plate, so it's not with the text, but just with the graphics. On this plate is described if someone finds this spacecraft, how he actually can read the information. And this is actually the most extreme situation of digital sustainability, because you need to explain someone who is not a human how to read this type of information. And it's very interesting. There are whole books written about this, so have a look at it if you're interested. And some of the images which are stored on this golden record, you can see today also. It's information of binary code, so and of the regular numbers. So what is 1 and 2 and 3 and so on. So here you see basically this digital element on it, and then there are also information about Earth, about life, about humans, about different cultures, about nature, about constructions back in these days, and also about traffic and even about humans into space. So in these records, basically, there is a lot of interesting information back on these 1970s. So what does it actually mean, the requirements to have some digital sustainability? First of all, we need the data itself, that's clear. So you need to have the text or image or whatever. Then you need to have a format specification. This means actually you need to be specific on how the information is stored. This talks to us about open standards, open formats. Method how to read the data. That's actually what the source code does. The software actually does help you to read data and to transform data. So it's about open source, data storage, hardware. So on this spacecraft, there was also the plate and also the player screwed on it. So this is all the elements you need to have a digital sustainability. Now, as you have understood what digital sustainability means, we have a look at it. What does it mean for open source and open source communities? First of all, we need to be aware that it's growing, still growing a lot, this open source topic. In only a few years now, we expect, or maybe even this year, to have about 2 million open source projects all over the world. Black Duck, this company who was mentioned yesterday, they have a very well updated repository about all open source projects in the world. We have done research about open source, and if you look at it, it's quite complex. If you have a Mozilla Firefox, for example, on the upper right, it actually requires a lot of components. So open source isn't just some very nicely clean thing, but it actually is interconnected with a lot of different elements used to run such an application as Mozilla Firefox. And this actually means it's very complex. It's a lot of knowledge within the code, but also a lot of knowledge actually assembling and connecting these different elements of open source. So what do I see as my favorite 5 elements of a sustainable open source community? First of all, good governance of this community. We have done research about the Eclipse community, and we have clearly seen that actually once IBM released the source code of Eclipse in 2001, it didn't grow much, its community. But once actually the IBM decided to build an Eclipse Foundation with a board of directors with equal rights to every member, then actually external companies, external third-party providers, they were also starting to use and also to contribute to Eclipse. So this is actually important to have a governance with a transparent decision process and a participative culture. The opposite of good governance is bad governance. And also what we know about bad governance in open source, it often results into a fork, in a splitting up of an open source project. It's on the one side, it's something bad because it's a waste of resources. On the other side, it's also a very important governance mechanism. It's like a sword of Damocles. In this way, actually, communities have incentives, and also especially companies have an incentive to have a good governance process. We have seen many famous examples like MySQL, who was forked into MariaDB, and Drizzle or Nagios or Mambo. Who knows Mambo? Probably no one, but who knows Joomla? A lot of you. And the same happened recently with OpenOffice. So OpenOffice now split into Apache OpenOffice, and now the fork is LibreOffice. And here we'll see the history of OpenOffice. It's very complex. It's a whole political system behind this open source project where you can see different forks and different strands. And nowadays, actually, it looks quite clear. Some colleagues did research how the community evolved after the splitting up of this LibreOffice fork. And you can see that the upper circle, this was the original community with openoffice.org. So most of the contributors, 67, actually joined the LibreOffice community, and only very little went over to the OpenOffice project. And the OpenOffice project, if you look at it today, it's basically not evolving anymore. However, if you look at LibreOffice, it's very active, a very huge, a very growing community. We organized the LibreOffice conference last year in Bern in Switzerland. It was a fantastic event, so I can suggest to you to follow this community well. The second factor, which I would say is important for a sustainable open source community, is to have a heterogeneous community. So the best example, of course, is the Linux kernel. You can see on YouTube very nicely made videos on how contributors actually, over time, commit patches to the Linux kernel. It's a nicely made animation. So you can see who actually sent to which component what type of patch. And this actually sees, if you look at the different contributors, especially at the companies, it's a highly heterogeneous community. I just looked at the report which came out yesterday from the Linux Foundation, and it shows that the maximum highest contribution which was made by one single company, nowadays it's by Intel. It used to be Red Hat, actually. Now it's 10.5% only, which is done by Intel. So imagine if one company drops out for some reason, which we don't want, but they leave the project, it doesn't hurt. So if there are still 90% of the community on the project, that's what I call a sustainable open source community. Now the Linux kernel, it's of course, this is not the average open source project, that's clear, but still, if you can think on these numbers, it's really impressive. I think it's definitely the largest cooperative software project ever, which was made, and it has 10,000 of patches in just one kernel release. It has over 11,000 individuals who have contributed to the Linux kernel in the last some years. And we need to be aware it's not just a voluntary project. 80% of the contributors are paid or employed by companies. Now, if you look at why actually do open source developers, contributors participate in open source communities, there's a lot of research being done. Colleagues of mine, they actually did a meta-analysis they looked at 30 different publications and found out these 10 types of different motivations for individuals to contribute to open source. So it ranges from completely intrinsic motivation to completely extrinsic motivation, from people who do it for ideological reasons, like the Free Software Foundation. It's about freedom of speech, or if they do it for altruism, just actually sharing someone, helping someone, kinship, to be together with a family, a community, to do it out of fun reasons, because it's my hobby, I love it to do. Or do you do it for reputational reasons, because you want to be famous and you want to be invited to nice conferences like this one? And if you do it for reciprocity, then you actually want to give back for something you have received. It's a very fundamental concept in psychology. You do it for learning reasons. You want to learn something. You have an own use case. You have a problem and you solve it. And while you have solved it, you can also share the code. You do it for career reasons. We have heard it yesterday. Open source is a nice career opportunity. And also you're paid, so you're employed, basically. And these are all the different motivations, and all of them, I believe, are fine. And of course, you only don't have just one type of motivation. It's a mixture. It's a profile. So these types of heterogeneous motivations also make up a heterogeneous community. Now, the third point I think is very important is the non-profit foundation, which is hopefully doing a lot of marketing for this open source topic. We have known all about the Linux Foundation, Apache, the GNOME, the KDE, and so on. There are lots of communities which have this legal umbrella, a non-profit umbrella, and they do about the legal issues, they do about the community events, the documentation, many other things. But most of things, but from my point of view, the very important part is the marketing and communication part. Why is it so important? Because if you look at today's big software companies, they're basically mainly marketing companies, not software companies. If you look at Adobe, for example, you can see all these stock market rated companies. You can look at their annual reports. I just updated the numbers from the fiscal year 2014. So they spend about the double of amount of money into marketing and communication than actually they do for research and development. So if you think of a software company like Adobe, or if you think about Apple, or if you think about Oracle, or if you think about Microsoft, there are more marketing companies than actually research and development and software developing companies. And that's why actually also I believe open source should be much more focused also into marketing and communicating software products. And I think that it's the right time to actually sell this open source, because if you have this Clayton Christensen innovator's dilemma, this is the classical innovation theory. You have the average customer requirements, which grows slowly, and then the first mover on the market, which is used to be is usually some proprietary product like a Microsoft Office, Oracle database, or SAP, and so on. They meet the requirements quite early. But then if you move on with time and the alternative, the second mover, the third mover actually enters the market, then after a certain time, though they also meet the needs of the customers. While the others have much more features, no one uses it. So if you have Microsoft Office or any Office product, you probably only use 5 or 10% of its functionality. And so the average user actually is quite happy or is completely happy with the open source version, which nowadays also meets the requirements for the average user. Fourth point, ecosystem. I think an ecosystem, a healthy ecosystem, also needs commercial suppliers, commercial service providers. There are lots of different business models with open source. This is just an example, some list of 8 open source business models. So you can do customized development, you can do service support, you can do subscriptions like Red Hat selling subscriptions for certain products. You can do value-added subscriptions, kind of doing some educational training, for example. You can do software as a service. You can do complementary products and so on. So there are various different types of business models, especially the one with the subscription. I think that's interesting for enterprise customers. So what we have done in Switzerland and which we want to grow is some kind of a directory where you can easily access and find out who actually serves for what kind of open source project, who actually does commercial services. It's opensourcedirectory.org. We have at the moment about 400 different open source products which are connected to about 300 service providers, connected to 300 success stories. And at the moment, the most part is in German, unfortunately, but we have now translated it into French because we have a French-speaking part in Switzerland. And the English version we want to work on this year. So if you want to remember, maybe by the end of the year, at ossdirectory.org, you can actually access the different service providers for open source. And last but not least, sometimes we have heard yesterday, programmers actually work on open source because they have an itch. They want to scratch their itch and solve a certain thing which a developer has a problem. However, if you look at sometimes the developer's itch is not the customer's itch. And if you're a customer, you want to have the opportunity also to influence an open source project and get things done. And so the most easiest way to do this is actually paying people or employing people and making the developers shift a little bit their motivation. And in this way, getting things done. There are platforms like bountysource.com where you can actually say, I'm willing to pay $1,000 for this type of feature in this open source project. And then maybe someone actually says, OK, I'm doing it. Or there is a project-specific feature platform, like in this e-learning system, Ilias, or other platforms, where actually the community says, we want to do this or that extension, please help us funding it. Or a customer says, I want to have this extension or this feature improvement, and how much do you actually, for how much would you do it? And then there's this institutional crowdfunding initiative, some model I've done a few times now in the umbrella of the Open Source Business Alliance, where actually the collective action problem with open source is that many people have similar needs, but because there's no single company behind it, actually these needs are not met, or at not least met in this speed, which maybe in a proprietary software context would have been done. So actually to group these interests, you can form some consortium or some group of users and define different specific requirements you want to be accomplished through this project. This is basically a three-phase process, but I don't go into specific. Ask me if you have any questions about it. And then you can actually work together on certain improvements. We have done this with public administrations. There were 7 public administrations from Germany, from Switzerland, from France, where they bundled their interest, the least common denominator, basically. It was about improving OXML, the Word and Excel compatibility with LibreOffice. And because everybody has this interest to actually have interoperable software and documents, then actually they were also spending money for this. And they spent about 140,000 euro. And with this money, we actually contracted 2 software providers to actually develop this functionality or improving these OXML filters. And this model, I believe, could be applied to many different contexts. We have done this with open layers, for example, and some other open source projects. If users actually bundle their interests, they come together, and then they can contract and put much more power on certain elements. So I'm already a little bit ahead of time, or not ahead of time, but over the time. So as a conclusion, first of all, manage your community in a fair way, have a good governance system. Foster the diversity within your community, so be interested not to be the only developer on your project or the only company. Also empower some central office, some community, some foundation, some association with resources, and also make them doing professional marketing, because marketing is crucial in software industry. Fourth, support companies to provide services for the software. You are interested in a healthy, also commercial software environment, because enterprise customers want to have service level agreements and so on. And fifth element, provide feature requests, marketplace, or something similar, so that actually users have the ability to get things done and actually have their itch being solved, even if it's not the itch of a developer. And this way, I hope your open source project also will fly for millions of years and millions of kilometers. And I'm very happy to be here, and thank you very much for your interest.